Grow Fam. This is Stephanie Rodriguez, editor and producer of the Regenerate Revolution Life Soil Success podcast. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Today we have our distinguished colleague Ian Murry, a world-renowned soil builder, on the show. He's going to be talking to us everything about soil list media, and all the different medias that we could talk about in the growing community. So without further ado, introduce Ian Murry.
Thank you for having me on.
Yes, indeed. So one of the things that I wanted to get to with some of our customers is I've realized after going to some garden centers and doing table days that customers don't even know what potting soil is. Like, they think it's dirt. It's not dirt, is it?
No, not at all. And there's multiple variations for different applications. So when I first started doing this about 20 years ago, I was blending soils at a facility that also did retail, and we sold a lot of bag soils too. A lot of soil amendments, fertilizers, whatever people wanted. And I was the type of person that always wanted to know why somebody was doing it the way they were, thinking that I would learn something that had a special reason. So we'd have people come in and buy, a truckload of bulk soil and 10 bags of peat moss and 10 bags of ocean forest and mix it together and ask them why. And oh, well, that's what my neighbor told me to do. Or, everybody wanted to be a mad scientist and have their own soil made, and nobody could ever tell me why. A lot of times it was just like, well, this is all the money I have, or, this sounds good, or I saw this online. So there's never been a true rhyme or reason for most of the people that we deal with on why they're actually using what they are, and most of them don't even know why.
So for an outdoor potting mix is kind of the most generic soil that people buy across the world, right? Outdoor gardening mix, whatever. Like, just walk us through, like, what are the ingredients of soil?
So most outdoor mixes are going to have either peat moss, coco coir, or a combination of. That's kind of what you use for the base or the fluff aspect. What's called the tilth of the soil. They'll have perlite, lava rock, pumice, something like that for drainage, and then most outdoor people also like to mix in something heavier like a compost or a humus to help retain the moisture, just so it doesn't dry up and they don't have to water every day when the sun's beating on it.
Yeah, and so, people use, definitely, like, making a heavier soil would be adding compost, worm castings, all those things, so that it holds a little bit more water, right? Mm-hmm. And if you say you didn't include that, it was just peat moss, coco coir, perlite, and lava rock, it would drain quick, right? Right,
that's when you get more of a soilless medium that you would use more on an indoor setting or smaller pots that you want it to dry out or drain out a little bit quicker so you could water. The big thing you got to remember when you're, especially with organic growing, which obviously me and you do, you're trying to create an ecosystem in your soil. So if you have something that dries out too quick and basically turns to a desert, everything dies. If you have something that holds too much water and it's like it's raining and it's a flood, everything dies. So you're trying to create that balance in there based off of your scenario, your pot or container size, to try to establish and keep that ecosystem alive as long as possible so it could do the work to help feed your plant.
Yeah, I think people are growing indoors, they're getting a really fast draining soil, and they're wondering why the microbes aren't surviving, and they're wondering why they have to feed so often and so regularly. And most indoor growers are using a cocoa perlite blend or a peat perlite blend. It just drains quickly. There's no water retention really, more than past a day or two, I'd say.
And then things start going anaerobic, and that's when you start getting your white flies and your thrips and your aphids and the pests moving. That's correct.
In terms of peat moss and coco coir, what's the differences in quality of peat moss and coco coir?
So one thing I'm really picky about is where I source my inputs from. I don't like to buy something that's $2 cheaper that could possibly be compromised. So we actually import our peat moss from a company called Calpeat that gets it from Eastern Europe. We found that it has all the same properties of what everybody's used to out of Canada as far as moisture retention and drainage, but there's a lot more availability where Canadian peat bogs are rapidly running out, and it's a lot lower in heavy metals. So if it's somebody that is worried about Cat 3 testing, it's going to give you a lot cleaner soil.
And Cat 3 testing, for the audience, is for, commercial cannabis growers are regulated and they have to do Cat 3 testing, which is a test that's going to talk about the heavy metals present in the cannabis before it goes to consumers. So finding good inputs like peat moss, coco coir that are low in heavy metals is ultimately the goal for commercial cannabis growers. Now let's talk a little bit about coco coir. I mean, is all coco coir the same?
No, not at all. What most people are used to is what comes out of India, which is basically just the coconut pith. So what they do is they screen out all the fibers, they ship it to China to make your doormats, and then what's left is the pith, which is basically like the coffee grounds. And it was an overburden for them for a long time, and they realized, we could compress this in bricks, so transportation makes sense. We could ship it to America and sell it to them for a soil amendment. It's sold by the metric ton, so there's a lot of inconsistencies in there. Like, you'll get sand and other stuff they use to kind of try to heavy it up. India, they do a lot of triple phosphate spraying on the rice fields, so you could run into some cadmium, heavy metals problems. So where we buy ours from is from the Philippines, and we found, as far as I know, they're the only company on the planet that is around for strictly horticultural grade cocoa. So everything they buy is from USDA certified organic grows.
And what's the name of the company for everyone?
It's Kanibo Organics. And so what they do is, instead of screening out the fiber to ship for your doormats, they grind everything down, they screen it to about 3/8 inch, so you get the fiber and the pith in there. So you get a lot more aeration, a lot better drainage, a lot evener moisture retention in pots, and you're way less likely to go anaerobic and have pest issues.
Just by including the fiber with the pith?
Just by including the fiber with the pith, correct.
And does it have a different texture or feel?
Oh yeah, it's almost like silky smooth. It's really unique product. I've really grown to like it over the last couple of years since we started using it.
Yeah, and so, cocoa obviously has other issues that I think you are probably familiar with, maybe with pathogens.
Yeah, there has been pathogen issues with the product coming in from India. The main one is Aspergillus niger, which, for people that don't know what that is, that's basically black mold.
Oh man.
So, and the problem that they're having is it's not detrimental to the plants, but it's growing on the flowers. So they don't know they have the issue until they harvest. They ship it off for tests, because part of your Cat 3 test, along with your heavy metals, is a mold spore test, and they're failing nationwide for mold on their cannabis and having to destroy their entire crops.
Well, yeah, and a fun little bit of trivia for the audience is that citric acid is produced from a similar microbe to that, a black mold microbe. And people aren't familiar with that, but yeah, citric acid that's used to flavor lemonades and different types of lemon products across the United States, and it's also used in, baking to lower the pH and all these different ingredients, right? Citric acid comes from mold, and my guess is that in some places they're probably growing that mold on a substrate and then discarding that substrate, and that's where you're getting a lot of the aspergillus.
They very well could be, and just to make clear, there's about 1,000 different types of forms of aspergillus out there. You cannot test anything pretty much without having aspergillus tested on it. It's everywhere. So there's only like a couple dozen that are truly harmful to people. So if anybody ever gets a mold test done and they find, oh no, I have aspergillus, which you're almost going to find every time, You need to then tell the lab that you want to know the specific species, and they'll test for that. And then you need to check to see if it's harmful or not.
Yeah, that's important actually, because species identification is what the labs sometimes don't do right away because it's more expensive, but...
Yeah, it's about triple the cost, so they do kind of an exploratory at first to see what's there, and then you have to give them the okay to actually do the identification.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of gets us into the next thing about, people who are making cheap soils to make a price point happen. What are the ingredients that somebody would put into a soil to cheapen it up?
So unfortunately, the most common thing would be some form of wood product. So there's a lot of wood products out there that aren't harmful. A lot of it's used in like the horticulture nursery side. But you got to think when you have a raw wood, and depending on the wood, what the C to N, the carbon to nitrogen ratio on it is, you run a risk. Microbes, the digesters in the soil, they like composting. So if you have fertilizer in your soil and you have raw wood that isn't broken down enough, those microbes are going to go and start composting that wood product, which in turn they stop digesting their food that you put in there, which in turn starts starving your plants. So it's kind of...
And nitrogen starvation is one of the leading causes of...
Super common in our industry, and a lot of times, like from my side, when I'm out looking for products to buy, and I have, say humus A, B, and C. Humus A could be beautiful, black, coffee ground looking. You could tell that it's been aged well. It's cool to the touch, and say it's $40 a yard. But then you get through B and C is bigger, chunkier. You can still see some of the color in the wood in it. You could tell that it went through a chipper and might have sat out for 3 or 4 months just to age a little bit. You know that it's not digested, which means that it is still being digested. And that one's, say, $30 a yard. So the way that I see it, especially, say I'm planning on putting 10% of this in my soil, to save $3 a yard, why would I want to buy what I know could potentially be a 50-50 harm to somebody's garden versus what I know is ready to go? So we're really picky about what we pick, what we use, percentages that we use. My main thing is a toll blender. So you come to me with your recipe, I give you a price, you say yes or no, and I blend it for you. I'm not going to intentionally let you blend something that's going to kill your plants. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've seen a lot of different scenarios. So, when it comes to the end of the day, I'll mix what you want for me or from me, but I will make suggestions on potential issues that you could have based off of the recipe you're supplying me.
And what about cheap ingredients that could cause pathogen issues? Maybe cow manure based things?
Yeah, we really try to stay away from anything manure based. You don't know what hormones or antibiotics those animals had, because it will transfer out into the manure. You don't know how aged it is. The fact that it's a manure, obviously it's a byproduct, so most of these places, they're not handling it with care or care how it's handled. You get a lot of trash and stuff like that in it, and then there's the huge risk of pathogens in anything manure based and in unfinished compost. So the only manure you'll even find on this property at all at any time is either bagged chicken manure, which we use in very small amounts and maybe a pallet a year just on special requests, or worm castings. That's all that touches the ground here.
Yeah, and I think worm castings is a really important ingredient in soil blending operations. I mean, I'm a huge fan of it. I mean, I think people don't really understand. I mean, worm castings are great because you're taking something like vegetable waste or some type of overburden from the ag industry. The worms are digesting it, shitting it out, and then there's just a ridiculous amount of beneficial bacteria and microbes that occupy that substrate. And I'm sure you use it a lot.
We use it close to every blend that we have. And what most people don't realize, on top of what the worms leave behind, the way that the majority of their digestion is done is through enzymes that they secrete on their body. So not only are you getting the beneficial benefit of the castings that's left behind, you get these very specific enzymes too that also do really good things in your soil.
Yep, and the enzyme profile, each bacteria can almost be identified by the enzyme profile they leave behind. So it's almost like a fingerprint, and each enzyme produces different effects. Bacillus licheniformis, Bacillus subtilis, very common in a lot of agricultural products. Those are actually milked, I call them, on the industrial level to produce enzymes, for cleaning enzymes and different types of enzyme products like RV enzyme, liquids. Enzymes are a huge part of why we want bacteria.
Well, and you are what you eat. So depending on the castings, you could have 10 different castings. All 10 of them, even though they came from worms, they're going to be completely different based off of the substrate that you ran them through and the food that you fed them. So you could actually manipulate and create a specific profile you want based off of what you give them as far as a food and a living environment.
Yeah, there's a lot of different worm castings providers that do manure-based castings where they've eaten manure, or they do, feedstocks like corn leftovers or wheat leftovers, or like all these different things. There's some that do mushroom compost leftovers. That's an interesting one, right? You have mushroom compost and mycelium then being digested, the casings being digested by worms.
Yeah, no, that's one of the more common practices down in the valley. You could get some really, really interesting castings from it. And a lot of those places too, they also just sell you a vermicompost where it's basically unscreened castings. So you're getting the digested. So most mushroom farms, when they grow their mushrooms, they use peat as a base and they add a sterilized dehydrated chicken manure. So this is different than just going out and getting your raw cow manure or sheep manure or something like that. Obviously, because they use it to grow food grade mushrooms. So, and they add in cottonseed meal and some other stuff, but once it's went through that cycle, it's basically depleted the nutrients that it needs to grow more food grade mushrooms. So they just ship it out the back door, once again as a byproduct, and then they reload in their trays to grow the next round of mushrooms. So if you get it from a good certified organic mushroom farm, yeah, it's great. And then you introduce your worm herd to it. A lot of places, so the place that I like to get it from, they actually, when they receive their mushroom compost, they combine it with some green waste, all free fall. So that means that it's, from like tree services, stuff like that, not your curbside pickup. So you're not getting, grandma's Roundup from her roses, stuff like that. So they mix it with the free fall green waste and some vegetable waste. They heat it up thermophilically like you do standard compost for 30 days, basically to sterilize it. Then they cool it down and then they introduce their worm herd and let the worms run through and digest it. You get a really, really clean, unique product that way. And you could buy it as just a vermicompost to where you still have some of those manures, more of the body in it, or you could buy it just the pure castings.
Yeah, and there's obviously grain-fed castings, right? Which I think is probably the next level up in terms of if you want to go to the high, if you want to talk about quality, I think grain-fed can be the highest quality if you're using obviously organic grain,
grains, yeah.
Organic non-GMO grain, and just because it's full of protein, right? And it's more protein packed, which is going to come out in the worm casting, and I think it's going to be a little more mineral dominant casting, but that's very hard to find. I've almost never found a grain-fed worm castings farm in the United States that can produce anything industrial grade or anything to an industrial level of soil blending.
No, that's more your 4-quart bag on the shelf.
Yeah.
And the good thing with it, a lot of grains, especially a lot of grains have a higher nitrogen profile. So a casting that you get from grain-fed worms are going to have more nitrogen available for the plants because once again, the worms secrete the enzymes. The enzymes help break down and make what's there available for the plants.
Yeah, and I think this is a good transition point to like maybe describing the process industrially for everyone listening, start to finish. So we have a plastic bag of soil, a 1.5 cubic foot bag at the store. Where was that journey started? Like where in the production process does it go? Let's just say a normal outdoor gardening soil bag. Like, can you walk everyone through the process of how that gets turned into what the final product is?
So
Breathe life into your soil with GreenGrow. Organic, sustainable, all-in-one soil additives for your gardening and farming needs. With the highest quality, non-harmful ingredients. Locally sourced, GreenGrow promotes probiotic soil building that will nurture and help your soil flourish, maintaining a living soil system for your plants to thrive. Easy-to-use products for all stages of growing. You take pride in what you grow, and so do we. Grow only the best with GreenGrow Biologicals. Order online or find your nearest location where GreenGrow products are sold.
the way that we do it, we have what's called an inline blending machine. So it's a long conveyor with a series of hoppers over it. It's all computer based, and our particular one can hold 350 formulas. So the way it works is if, say, you want 25% peat, 25% cocoa, 25% compost, 25% perlite. You got hopper 1, 2, 3, and 4. You tell it basically the percentage, and then it slows that conveyor belt down to that percentage to evenly lay the material on the conveyor below, where at that point it goes through a blend head, which is kind of like a series of rototiller tines, mixes everything together. You have...
But what about the peat and the cocoa? Does that come in flocked?
No,
already?
it doesn't. So it takes a lot of equipment. So we have what's called bale processors. So basically what you do for a bale of peat moss, it comes in compressed 2-to-1. The biggest issue, most of our stuff is sourced from other parts of the world. Freight is a huge factor. So they compress things in forms to get as much in a container as possible to keep the freight down. So peat moss comes in compressed 2-to-1 and basically like a 7.5 foot tower. We have to take the wrapping off of it, put it in the bale processor, close the door, and it's got a chain that spins on the top with a bunch of teeth on it and an elevator floor. So as the chain spins, the elevator floor slowly raises up. So it takes and it flocks that material out in a hopper to get back to your 2-to-1 flockage. With the cocoa, this is probably the most violent one of all because a lot of those come in compressed anywhere from 4-to-1 to 6-to-1. So I mean, if I threw one at your head, it's going to knock you out. They're hard. So a lot of places that don't have the equipment or the capital for the equipment will just basically have a bunker, throw their cocoa in there, turn the hose or sprinklers on, and slowly let it soak up the moisture over time. We have a special processing machine designed by a company called Mitchell Ellis, where basically you put a pallet of these cocoa blocks in, you lift the back gate, they fall in the machine where they're slowly drug up on a chain, and they kind of go off this real slow conveyor belt ride into this big hopper that basically has a big steel auger spinning in there, and it grinds these blocks together in a figure-8 fashion to where eventually they break down to where they can fit through the bottom auger screen, goes through about a 20-foot auger where it's getting sprayed the whole time to hydrate it, because since it is compressed, you need the water to sponge it back out, and it plops out the other end. So the advantage that I have back when I first started doing this and I just had to flood the blocks, you're lucky if you could process 2 pallets in a day. You're not getting a lot of production done that way. With the current equipment I have, I could do 5 pallets an hour. So it really increases the volume we're able to produce out of our facility.
Yeah, I mean, so we're taking it from it being flocked, it's going into the conveyor, it's going in the hoppers, right? Or the hoppers, conveyors, and it has the formula set in there, right? So now it walks down the conveyor, and what happens?
Walks down the conveyor. We have 2 dosatrons, which are liquid dosing machines to put either a fertilizer or a wetting agent, inject it into the water and spray it on the material.
What's a wetting agent?
Wetting agent, so peat moss, obviously to get as much on a truck as possible, they need to dry it. Peat moss in general is what is called hydrophobic, which means that it repels water, not absorbs water. So when it's wet, it'll stay wet, but when it dries, it becomes hydrophobic and it doesn't like to take on water. So if you've ever been out watering your garden by hand with your hose and you're watering it and you see the water just pooling on top and it's not going in, that's because you're hydrophobic. So we use what is called a wetting agent. What it does is you spray it on your soil so it hits the peat, whatever could possibly be dry and hydrophobic, and it's basically almost like a surfactant, kind of like a soap that allows the water to then penetrate back into that soil. So if you ever notice, anytime you buy a bag of soil, you open it up, you stick your hand in there, there's always some moisture in it. The reason for that is because it was sprayed with the wetting agent and the added water to give it some moisture, because once again, we're creating an ecosystem. If it comes in muddy, everything's flooded and dead. If it comes in dry, it's like the desert, everything's dead. So you want to keep that moisture content in there, keep it nice and moist, not wet, but moist. And that wetting agent helps do that through its shelf life in the bag.
Well, that makes sense. So, we just sprayed it with a dosatron with the wetting agent to keep it nice and fresh. And where does it go from there?
From there, it goes underneath our chemical hoppers. They're not necessarily chemicals in there, that's just what they're called. They're basically the hoppers that keep the fertilizer in it to disperse whatever fertilizer. So we have a big 2-yard ribbon blender. If you come to me and you say, hey, I need 100 yards and I want 2 pounds of this, 3 pounds of that, 4 pounds of that, we then take that amount of bags, 300 pounds, 400 pounds, dump it in this ribbon blender, mix it all up. So we're basically creating a custom blended fertilizer. In your case, when we create or manufacture the Pridelands, we're taking either the Nature's Pride or the Pridelands veg fertilizer or the bloom fertilizer, and the Earthshine, we're combining it in that ribbon blender. So that way everything's pre-mixed and it knows per pound how much fertilizer to dispense. So at this point you have all of your solids on the conveyor, you've hit it with the water, the wetting agent, whatever liquid inoculants you want, you have your fertilizers on it, so now you just got to mix it together. So at that point it goes through the blend heads, dumps out on another conveyor that takes it up overhead to where it could drop into either the totes, because we do 1, 2, and 3 yard, the big white super sacks, into the bagging machine, or if it's going out for bulk for a bunker. So in this case, we're going to the bagging machine. So it's all air controlled, so it's got a gate that kicks open to guide the material off the conveyor into the hopper for the bagging machine. The way the bagging machine works is pretty cool. So you put in a stack of bags, say a stack of 100 bags. You just hit start and it's got an arm that comes down, picks up the bag, opens the bag, swings the bag underneath the jaws where the material falls into the bag. It's programmed for time for the material to run, so we could do different size bags. So we do 1 cubic foot bags, 1.5 cubic foot bags, 50 liter bags, 3 cubic foot bags, and that's all adjusted by time, how long the conveyor belt runs. So the conveyor belt runs, the material falls in the bag. Once it falls in the bag, it drops the bag and has these 2 arms that come together and clamp the bag shut. After that, it slides down a conveyor to where it hits the bag sealer, which is all heat sealed. It's about 750 degrees. So those arms release it. The bag gets pulled through the heat sealer where it gives it that nice seal line on it. And then it goes to the bag kicker, where the bag kicker is basically a foot that kicks the bottom of the bag out to where it lands flat, so we're not standing up anymore. It goes under a bag flattener which is 2 conveyors that basically squish it down so it's able to stack nice on a pallet.
Yeah.
And then it goes up to the palletizing platform where the guys put it on the pallet. And the cool thing, that whole process is 6 seconds. So every 6 seconds, it's picking the bag, opening the bag, swinging the bag, filling the bag, dropping the bag. And then when that arm's pulling it to the sealer, it's starting on the next bag.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to give the audience like an idea of like the industrialization process of filling a bag, because, you know, there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, we spend a lot of money on our equipment. There's a lot more expensive equipment though, like the bagging machine that, say, Miracle Grow uses. It's $100 million per bagging machine. Or sorry, not 100 million. I meant $1 million per bagging machine. So yeah, it gets pretty pricey, and it's all automation. It gets pretty technical.
I think that's like a good visual for the customers who are listening, or potential new customers of soil in general, of that bag of soil that's sitting on a pallet at your local garden center. Where did it come from? How to get there? What's in it? Where those ingredients come from? So we really covered all those topics, I think, really well. I mean, is there anything that you would recommend or warn customers not to use with their soil, or not to use in blending soil?
Once again, stay away from any raw products at all, whether it be wood or manures. If you're pay attention to the smell too. I remember one time I was at a trade show about 10 years ago, and we're walking through looking at the booths. It was an outside trade show, and I had this funny smell, and I'm like, what is that? And I turned to the guy I was with. I'm like, is there like a sewage leak around here or something like that? And I'm not going to say the name, but he goes, nope. And he points to the truckload of soil we're sitting next to. He said it's coming from those pallets because it went anaerobic. So you could smell, if it smells like foul at all, death.
That's anaerobic.
That's anaerobic. You don't want to buy that. You're going to kill your plants.
It's nature's way of letting you know to like not be around it. So anaerobic is is removing the presence of oxygen, so that the microbes that are aerobic microbes, which usually beneficial microbes, die off, and the anaerobic ones take over. And the anaerobic ones will wreak havoc on your soil system. You need to have some pockets of anaerobic microbes in a soil, but very little, right? It should be dominated by aerobic microbes. So when you have a foul smell, you know, a yellowing of the root systems, it could be discoloration and gooey, all those things are bad signs. And never plant your plants into a really foul smelling soil, because dead to rights, you're gonna get root rot.
Yeah, and you also want to pay attention to the temperature. And so one term that gets thrown around a lot is hot. My soil's hot. Well, there's 2 ways your soil could be hot. Your soil could be hot from too much fertilizer, where it's going to burn it, or what most people reference to is it could be physically hot from an unfinished compost or something like that. But yeah, the big one that people need to understand, like, so when we make a soil here, I'm not making 5 yards, put it in the corner. You know, we're making 300, 400, 500 yards at a time, and it goes into a big pile. So yes, there is this thing called thermal mass. You just introduced the microbes to their source of food, for one, by combining on that conveyor belt your fertilizers with your worm castings and whatever else you're inoculating with. And think about it this way. This is the analogy I like to do. If you're hosting Thanksgiving dinner and it's you and your wife, you guys are cooking, everything's fine. Next thing you know, your family members start showing up. And you got 15 people in your house, and everybody goes, oh man, it's really hot in here. And everybody starts opening the windows to start cooling it down. That's thermal mass. The presence of those, like, say, dozen extra bodies in there will heat up the inside of your house 8-10 degrees.
Yep.
So you open your windows so everybody's comfortable, then everybody leaves, and it's back to you and your wife, and all of a sudden you're cold and you don't realize why. Well, because your windows were open and that thermal mass is gone. It's the same thing with soil. If you have a 50-yard pile of soil sitting there, think about the billions and billions and billions of active microbes that are dancing around in there. They're creating thermal mass. So what I always encourage people to do if your soil is physically hot, because especially if you're buying bulk, more than likely it's going to show up warm. We can go out there right now to a pile of cocoa, put my composting thermometer in it, and it'll be 140 degrees. It's inert. There's nothing in there. It's just thermal mass. So anytime you buy soil, before you freak out, because it feels warm, fill a 5-gallon bucket, put it to the side, let it sit there for an hour, stick your hand in it, see what it feels like. So you just removed it from that thermal mass. If it cools down, which is the majority of what's going to happen, you're completely fine. If it stays hot, even in that 5-gallon bucket, that's when you know whoever blended it for you used unfinished compost.
And unfinished compost will start recomposting.
Will recompost, and then once again, the microbes are breaking that down. They're not breaking your food down, and then you starve your plants essentially. And it doesn't matter how much fertilizer you add until those microbes are done composting that wood. They're not going to touch the fertilizer, because the fertilizer doesn't feed the plants as well. You know this better than anybody. It's what the microbes leave behind that fills the plant. So if they're not breaking that fertilizer down, it doesn't matter how much you have in there, the plant's going to starve.
The microbes in a normal soil system, the microbes are feeding the plant, not the fertilizer. And if that's one thing that we could give customers today too, is that you're not just adding fertilizer and the plant goes, oh yum, I'm eating it all. It's in an organic system, all microbes. So you're building soil to build microbes to build the plant.
Correct. And that's the difference between organic and synthetic gardening. And so many people are like, oh, my plant grows so much better when I feed it salts. Well, that's because those things are designed for the plant to take up instantly without having any of the soil work done. But it's basically like being on steroids. Okay, you get this instant growth and mass, but is somebody on steroids, are they healthier than me or you? Are they going to create a healthier fruit? No. Organics, slow and steady wins the race. Organic farming, you're always going to get a better product, and typically if you do it right, you're going to get a better yield too, no matter what you're growing.
Yeah, some people hate hearing that, but it's the flavor, the terpene profile, and for me the yields are always there. So I don't have any. I might hit it occasionally with a little synthetic just to give it a punch in the gut if it needs it, especially in cold weather. But
well, that's what you got Tribrid for.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so that pretty much gets down to everything I wanted to ask today. So I wanted to thank you for coming on the program and let everyone know out there, how do they find you? How do they find information about you?
Well, one easy way to do it is obviously through you at thegreengrow.com. You could go to growwest.com also and look up the soil section. And yeah, me and you, we've been doing business together for a long time. And our goal has always been to create and provide our customers with the best products. So any and all questions are always welcome.
Yeah, so if you guys need to get a hold of Ian, or you want us to do some custom blending for you or some custom soil consultations, reach out to the Green Grow. You can call us. You guys can email us. I don't know what the email is, maybe support@thegreengrow.com. Our Instagram is @thegreengrow. So if you just want to DM us, that's really the easiest way. If you want to DM us like, hey, can you and Ian help me with some kind of soil project? Great, just DM us. Yeah.
Well, and I can't tell you over the years how many times that, I've picked you up and we've went out to a farm together and diagnosed problems together. And I could confidently say, I don't think we've ever been to a farm before that was willing to listen to what we say that did not have bigger and better yields.
We improved everything about their farm, and we continue to do it, and we usually do it for free. So it's not like we're out there asking for a paycheck. We're going to do out there for free because at the very least we want our farms to be successful, which makes us ultimately successful. So
yeah, I mean, there's people that will easily charge you $200 an hour for that. We've driven as far as 8 hours away to help fix problems. And yeah, I mean, it's not free. We like your business, because obviously if we could supply the end user with a better product, it makes sense to order the products from us. But that's our goal, is education and just making everybody as successful as possible. And hopefully we get a sale out of the deal.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for having us today at your facility, and Thanks again, all the listeners, for tuning into the Regenerate Revolution podcast, where we talk about life, soil, and success. I'm your host, Mark Irvin, signing out.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode on the Regenerate Revolution Life, Soil, Success podcast. Do not forget to leave us a 5-star rating, review, like, comment, and share with your friends.